Well, let's see. I guess we could probably get started. Sorry, there's some messages in the chat that I was responding to. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our town hall meeting here to talk about the future of the Mazamas and like current state and what's going on. So first, I'll talk about some ground rules. The way that we had envisioned doing this was people would stay on mute for the most part and then enter questions in the chat, and then we'll be able to record those and answer whatever we can here in the meeting during the Q&A session. And then for those we don't have time for or can't answer right now, we can get back to you. So the format will be, we'll kind of give an introduction of, where we're at right now and how we got here. I'll introduce Kayleen Deathridge, our interim executive director, and she'll go over the focused assessment that we did, and then we'll have a Q&A session. So with that, let me give you kind of a background on why we're here. So I assume that most folks read the recent articles in the bulletin, Kayleen's and my messages, and the point was really to bring awareness to the membership that we kind of need to change how we think about how we're operating, and we wanted to get involvement from the membership on the future. And share like what we're looking to do next, get your input, and then the bottom line is, like, in order for us to be successful as an organization, like, it's going to take everybody, and that can come in different forms. It could come from your volunteerism, your ideas on your vision for the organization, your vote, if we for future leaders, or anything else in the direction of that we want to go. So a little bit about how we got here. Probably the big shock factor is like the financial situation, and one thing I kind of want to point out is, like, given situations like that or statements that grab attention, it can be easy to go into like solutions space really quickly. You'll kind of default there, and we think about, like, well, how did this happen, or what if we just did this one thing and we could find a quick fix or something like that. And like those, I guess what I would say is, like, to take out of this meeting, really the point would be to maybe step back and take a bigger picture and ask those questions of, like, how did we get here and why, and what can we do differently or change how we think about doing things to avoid these situations in the future. Because, like, these sorts of existential crises in the Mazamas are not new. They're kind of part of our history. If you talk to Matthew Brock, our library and historical collections manager, like, he's got quite an interesting collection of old meeting minutes and things like that just people back in, like, the first half of the 20th century were talking about the same kind of things that we're talking about now. It seems like every 7 to 10 years the Mazamas goes through an existential crisis where we're trying to figure out, are we a club, are we a nonprofit, like, what do those mean, who do we want to be, and all of that. And this time's a little different because we're kind of under a financial crunch now, and like, we really need to consider how, if we just kind of consider how we do things now and don't really make any significant changes, we'll run out of money fairly soon, in the next several years. So everybody's sort of under the assumption that the Mazamas is this institution that's been around forever, and it'll continue to be around forever, but it won't without you, the membership and the community, continuing to make it viable.
Jesse, sorry to interrupt. Folks are asking for an introduction of who you are, maybe a little bit first, and then also your title currently with the organization.
Sorry, my name's Jesse Applegate. He, him. I'm the current president of Executive Council. And then Amy Feely-Mohala, she's the current vice president. Kayleen Deathridge is our interim executive director. Let's see, who else is here? David Urbaniak is our treasurer. And I think Amanda Ryan Fear is here also. She's also on the board.
And Bob is also on the call as well.
Yeah, Bob's also a member of Executive Council.
Bob Breivogel.
Sorry, yeah, I missed that. I had the chat window closed. Is there anything else?
No, I think folks are just wanting to kind of get a high level kind of recap of where we are, which is kind of what you're going into, and how we got here and why we're having this really important town hall.
And the first couple slides we're gonna share tonight, we'll dig right into that. We'll kind of recap where we are. So that information is absolutely will be our starting place.
All right, should I continue?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay, so how did we get here? So, I mean, I feel like folks are fairly aware of, you know, that the Mazamas has spent a lot of money recently in the last 9 years or so. And those were in that there was a considerable investment made in the last series of strategic plans that were focused on growth, you know, like this climbing and mountaineering, and, you know, the demand has certainly been there, and Mazamas was trying to rise to the occasion and meet that demand. But for multiple reasons, it just didn't work out that way. So like we spent this money and intended to grow, and then here we are, you know, at the end of those strategic plans, and it just didn't work out how we thought they might. Some of those reasons are, you know, maybe some of the things that I talked about in my bulletin article about like our like structural limitations in the bylaws, and maybe disparate interest groups, you know, amongst the different communities within the Mazamas, between like climbers or hikers, or you know, people like to do their things, but maybe have less engagement with like the business side, and that's okay, but it's still important to realize or recognize that, you know, we're kind of all in this together. And then there's also been, you know, near constant change in leadership and staff over the last several years too. And so there really hasn't been a lot of consistency, you know, to follow through on ideas and implementation. And then of course the pandemic. And, you know, another thing that I think was maybe could have been an incorrect assumption was like that there were infinite resources that we had, you know, kind of back to that we've been around forever and will continue to be around forever. And also on the aspect of growth, that we had like infinite volunteers to like support all of that. So I'm sure there are other issues that could be added to the list, but what we did in this last November was, given the change in staffing and stuff, we were kind of faced with sort of, well, our next existential crisis, the current one. And the Executive Council reached out to a third-party resource that has expertise in nonprofits and page 2 partners, and especially nonprofits in transition like us. And we initially contracted a consultant, Liz Field, who some of you spoke with. who performed a focused strategic assessment to help us get an idea and come up with a plan to move forward and get on our feet again. And Liz interviewed about 24 people, including current and former board members, current and former staff, and volunteer leaders and former members. And then with that assessment, along with that assessment, it was presented to the board in December. Page 2 recommended that we hire an interim executive director. They recommended a multi-step plan that included an interim executive director that would help us pave the way to choose a full-time permanent executive director using that information from the assessment. So with that, I'll introduce Kayleen Deathridge, our interim executive director, and she will talk about the assessment and go from there. Kayleen?
Jesse, thank you. It is terrific to get the chance to be on the line with so many of you. So thank you so much for your time tonight. And more important than even your time this evening is just the sincerity of your commitment to Mazama's and the amount of time that you all put in and care to this organization. I have had a number of you reach out with an email, swing by my office if you're in the MMC, and just say hi and share with me how you contribute to the organization. And it's really, it's just terrific. And I feel really privileged to have the chance to work with all of you. So thank you so much for the warm welcome. And I think what I really want to help the board to do today is bring everybody to a common level of understanding, if we can. So one of the things, and you'll hear me talk more about this as we move through the assessment that was done and how we're using that to inform our decisions about how to move forward. But one of the things that is clear to me, even as I interact with several of you at the Mazamas, is this organization is so fortunate to have so many different activities, classes, events, initiatives, all moving forward simultaneously. And many of you are involved in at least one, if not a couple of those. And what I noticed is that often people they get most of their information from the particular lane that they're volunteering in or the class that they're involved in. Perfectly normal, that's what you would expect. But I also see that there's a lack of continuity of information across the organization. So you're going to hear us talk more about how we do a better job of communicating and getting everybody the information that they need so that we can have kind of a shared understanding of where the organization is at. But that's the lack of that at the moment, I think, leads to more questions and doesn't give people enough context to filter some of the information that they're getting about Mazamas and does not necessarily lend to their understanding of the facts that need to be considered as we make decisions about the path forward. So to try to begin to fill in some of those holes and put us all in a position where we can have a conversation together about what the priorities are for Mazamas in the short term and what the vision for how you see yourself providing service in this community are for the long term. That's what brings us to our listening session tonight. And I see this as a beginning. I know I speak for the executive committee when I say that. This isn't a one and done, but this is hopefully the beginning of a conversation that we will have in a variety of ways over the weeks and months ahead, and will hopefully provide an authentic way for people to get more information and also share their thoughts and their ideas about what will help Mazamas be a strong organization for years and years to come, as you have already been for many, many decades. So let's jump into the next slide if we can. So Jesse mentioned that we had an assessment done by one of my colleagues at Page 2 Partners, and that happened in December. And that was kind of an intensive 2-week period of talking to about 25 people connected to the organization. So it certainly was not exhaustive, because there are probably 2,500 of you that we could talk to. But there was a lot of consistency in the feedback that we got. And so that was helpful to us in kind of understanding where we are. So let's just sort of quickly build on the recap. Jesse already gave you a number of these facts. So obviously you're here today on a 128-year history. So I would just pause you there and say, you guys, that is remarkable. Many organizations don't make it anywhere near 128 years. So I would say it's a testament to your value to this community, your commitment as members, your care for your mission. Mazama's has an extremely good reputation in the community, and that's a serious asset that you can build upon. Your operating budget as passed this year was 1.1 million, but your revenue projections were only 900,000. So that's a little preview to the reality that we're operating upside down right now from a budgetary standpoint, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. You do have, you're blessed to have about $1 million in investments that are in the stock market, and they're helping to support the organization. In an ideal world, you would largely be able to leave those untouched and let those grow, right? And they could then spin off. Most organizations, it's around 4% that their invested funds spin off to help support operations year in and year out. And so that's a real, when you can borrow from yourself first before you need to go anywhere else, that's very advantageous. So trying to protect that investment and not need to use it to cover your daily operations is a real asset to you if you're able to maintain that. Something to think about. Obviously, you've got 2 great buildings. The Mountaineering Center is wonderful. I just had the opportunity at the beginning of March to go up and spend the weekend at the lodge. Wow, I loved it. It's beautiful. If anybody on this call hasn't been up there, you should get up there, because it's really a terrific facility, and you're lucky to have it. Your membership base sits around 2,700 right now. That was about 3,800 about 5 years ago. So that is, as most of you know, evidence of the decline in membership. You are not unique in that way. Membership organizations across the country are seeing a decline in members. I think that part of what organizations with as much history as you have need to do is think about how they continue to stay relevant and stay fresh, pertinent, if you will, to their members. That this is a trend that is growing, that people are joining less than they did in decades past, and understanding that, and then knowing how to pivot your organization to meet that moment and draw people in ways that meet their needs today in 2022. I think that's one of the challenges that as an organization you need to think about as you carve your path forward. Okay, David, next slide. So I mentioned a couple of these, so I won't go into them in great detail, because we'll talk more as we move through the assessment findings. But I would say, first and foremost, reputation and history. I have long known who the Mazamas were, and as an outdoor enthusiast myself, maybe more on the backpacking and hiking side than on the climbing, I have always had a highly favorable opinion of Mazamas, and seeing you as an organization that is both attractive and relevant in the community. The amount of volunteerism that you have in this organization puts you, I would say, near the top of the list. The engaged commitment of membership, how many of you are on this call tonight, speaks to the level of care and the willingness to give your time, your talent, and your treasure. That is an asset that cannot be overstated and should never be taken for granted. You've got some great partnerships out there. Again, your reputation opens a lot of doors for you. And there are a lot of organizations that want to be affiliated with the Mazamas, and that's a good thing. We need to think about how to continue to build on that. Your programs, your facilities are also excellent. I think there's a lot of room there to think about how you leverage those in the future and help them, put them to work for you even more than you are now. Your staff right now is small but mighty. You're only, somebody had asked for kind of a recap of staff. You have 3 individuals that are on your permanent staff right now. And then you have 2 of us that are on contract. So one would be me as your interim executive. And then Kiki Sherrard, your lodge manager, also works on a contract basis. So you are significantly understaffed as compared to budget at the moment. You're also understaffed as compared to the work that needs to be done. So part of this is just looking at how do we right size the organization right now and staffing and volunteer structure to make sure that we can meet the moment and that we're all focused on the right priorities. And that's part of what this conversation is about. Okay, next slide. So our challenges and our opportunities, I think, at a high level strategy, we need to understand who we are in this moment and where we're headed. And I think there's a couple of different prevailing ideas about where Mazamas could go moving forward. And I'll probably come back to this a number of times tonight. We're at the point where we need to make a choice. I think either we are going to move in the direction of an organization that really leans into what it means to be a 501c3 charitable nonprofit, able to fundraise in all of the venues that are typically available to nonprofits. So that would be grants, that would be donor advised funds, that would be major gifts, legacy gifts, events, but also to raise money, not just from your membership, but more broadly in the community through foundation support. That's one direction. Another direction is to lean in and say, we have always historically been a member organization. That's where we want to focus. And then you need to build out a structure for the future that is prefaced around being an exclusive organization that is in essence a club to its members. Own that identity and build your strategy that way. So I think part of what we really are wanting to queue up for all of you tonight is that I don't think you can have it both ways. I really think you're at a moment where you've got to decide what is the direction that the organization is headed. Your choice of your next leader will be predicated on knowing what the answer to that question is, because the kind of person that you're going to choose to lead after my time with you is done should be based on the type of future that you're trying to create. And the skills and the attributes of that individual would need to be tailored to the type of organization that you want to run. So obviously our financial situation is serious. I would not call it dire yet, but I would say that it will become dire if we don't make some decisions now so that you can strengthen your current position and you have a path to financial sustainability moving forward. Without financial liquidity and sustainability, you'll always be focused on money, which is going to take your eyes off your mission and the programming that you want to offer in the community. Roles and responsibilities, we'll talk about that quite a bit more, as well as board and committee composition and structure. And then kind of that last bullet really relates back to the first one. Who are we and where are we headed? So let's dive in and talk about the recommendations. I'm gonna provide you a little commentary to go with each one of these. As I move through, now is a great time to start putting questions in the chat, particularly if they come up as related to these recommendations. The team, our host team, will continue to pay attention to that chat. They'll grab those questions. And then once we break here and move into the Q&A, we'll share those questions out with the entire audience and begin to answer as many as we can. And as Jesse said, we're recording all of this. So anything that we're not able to address tonight, we will decide post-session how we get that information back out to everybody. Okay, so let's dive in. The first recommendation is all about how you begin to build the plan that's going to take you towards the future. And this gets us right back down to the point that I just made a moment ago. A strategic plan is going to outline the tasks that you need to follow that are going to get us towards the vision for the future that the board and the membership settle upon. So without clarity about the type of organization that Mazamas wants to be and how it's going to prioritize service to members versus service to the community at large, it puts you in this sort of hybrid space where you're trying to be both. And does not seem to be working particularly well. It's not sustainable with the current structure to try to move both concurrently. And so number one will be to begin that strategic planning process. And the way I look at it as your interim leader, we need to put together right now what I would call a 12-month work plan. We need to know which of these priorities we're going to start working on in this transition time, with the intense goal of stabilizing the organization, clarifying your leadership structure, and getting you ready to hire that new executive. As soon as that person is on board, then it's time for the organization to embark on a more robust, like I would say probably a 5 to 10 year strategic plan that's phased. So maybe there's 3 to 4 phases in a 10-year plan, and you approach them in 2 to 3 year increments. But that's work that probably happens over 6, 10, 12 months, and absolutely should be led by the individual who is going to be a permanent leader on your team. So next one I want to talk about takes us into financial position. So I think that the approach to financial management that you have been working under for the past decade or so simply isn't sustainable. That doesn't mean that those decisions when they were made were wrong. I think Jesse alluded to, given the situation that you had when you made the decisions to start investing, expanding staff, moving more into program, making investments in your infrastructure and systems, those choices made sense in light of your desire to grow. It simply, unfortunately, did not result in as much membership growth as you were hoping. And so it's left you in a position where you've depleted some of those investment reserves, and your membership growth has not kept pace with the projections that were needed in order for you to sustain the new level of spending that comes with the investments that you made in systems and people. So it's simple math. Once we reach the point that those new infusions of investment were complete, the budget had grown to the point that there was inadequate revenue streams to continue supporting spending at that level. And the organization simply hasn't pivoted quickly enough to rein in its spending. And it's not just cutting spending, because you're not really, your spending right now makes sense, but your revenue streams are inadequate to keep up with that level of spending. So I'm going to say this several times. You cannot cut your way out of the problem. Part of what you're going to have to do is figure out additional sources of revenue. And that's why making the decision about what your strategic focus is so important, so that we can design the right revenue streams to support where you want to go.
I'm going to chime in here.
Please do.
I think you pretty much did answer Brad's question, but he did ask, how did the organization spend 2.6 million drawdown from investments from 2014 to 20? And I think, highlighting that, the strategic plan that was put in place with previous EC, what was set as far as the goal didn't come to fruition, as far as how many members we thought we were going to be able to maintain and so forth. So.
No, Amy, that you're exactly right. And I think it's twofold. You made a number of investments in systems, by which I mean a number of IT systems, right? Sales, your database, your website. So all of those are working well, but they weren't one-time costs. First, you purchase them and you get them installed and running, and then those have to be maintained. So there's an ongoing cost to scaling up in your systems that you've got to incorporate into your budget and be able to sustain over time. The same thing is true with some of the positions that you have put in place. Those as well are essential to support some of the infrastructure that you've built. And I think that one of the obvious questions could be, well, why not just go back to the staffing configuration that you had in 2013, right? Why don't we just cut staff? Wouldn't that solve the problem? But I would submit this, since that time, while your dues have kept pace with inflation, your dues revenue has declined as a result of declining membership. So the smaller pool of members means a smaller pool of volunteers. And those that are volunteering have to do more because there's less staff. And we're hearing volunteers talking about, I just can't do it anymore. I don't have any more hours to give. I'm burned out. So that puts additional demands on staff. So it really is not as simple as just cutting the staff and thinking that that solves the problem. I don't think that that's an entirely viable path as a standalone solution either. Does that make sense? So let me just kind of keep going then. I think that the reality is that the answers to where you're at today are going to take a multifaceted approach. So we're going to need to look at how do we grow revenue while we're also seeking to further clarify what it means to be a member and what it takes to become a member, while we're also looking at how we can bring in new revenue, which revenue streams are going to be most effective to us in the future to help us stabilize the organization and position yourself for growth, revenue growth, membership growth, programs that are in alignment with the vision of the organization. So all of that becomes a real priority for you to address in the months ahead. The other thing that I have noticed as I've been a part of the organization is that your development and fundraising effort at Mazama's is underdeveloped. I think it could be a lot more robust than it is. So when I look back at the position that Laura, who was your development director, was holding, a significant portion of her time was really focused on membership support and the annual membership renewal campaign. Now, while that's an important source of revenue, it's only one source of revenue. And I don't think that there was enough of her time allocated to going out and cultivating some of the new sources of revenue that would reduce some of your reliance on membership dues and let you impact the community in new ways. So all of these work together. We need to take care of the budget deficit. We need to look at the decisions that will help us identify new revenue sources. We need a committee that's actively working alongside the executive director and staff to be bringing in new revenue. And then we've got to kind of right size our spending in alignment with our priorities and make sure that we quit passing budgets that don't balance. Okay, let's move on to roles and structure. I'm going to kind of try to keep pressing through these so that I don't eat up our time to get to Q&A, which really is the most important part of our discussion tonight. So number 5, you have done. I am here and happy to be so. So that in this interim time, again, what we're really looking at is what are the things that are critical? What needs to be addressed right now to stabilize and provide the organization a little bit more continuity? And what structural or administrative organizational tasks can we address so that when your new leader is chosen and comes on board, you want that person to be able to jump right in to growth and executing on the mission of the Mazamas. So delivering program and or helping you to make the organization as robust as possible. So I look at my job as to try to help you take care of the nonprofit mechanics and stabilizing, in hopes that your new leader can benefit from the work that we're doing right now and be able to start making a difference for you faster once they come on board. Okay, I'm going to move my cat who really wants to be in front of the computer, and we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so the next recommendation is around board structure and composition. And I think this one is important. The Mazama's bylaws they're very specific, and a lot of you probably are aware of that, but a lot of how would I describe it? As I think about other nonprofits and the role that the board plays, the board has a little more latitude to make decisions about adjusting the structure of the board or about making decisions around programmatic direction than the board has here at the Mazamas. And that's just partially because of how you have put your bylaws together. So that it's not a right or wrong issue, it's just simply acknowledging that there's a lot of constraints in the bylaws that make it hard for the current staff and board leadership to pivot. It's difficult to make course corrections because most of the decisions that need to be made to stabilize the organization require going out to the full membership for vote. And that's a time-consuming process, right? We're turning the Titanic, we're not turning a speedboat. And so there is a couple of things that we need to think about with regard to that. And this really will be up to all of you, the membership, to make the decisions that will give the organization greater ability to be nimble. First and foremost, I really, really recommend that you need to look for ways to diversify your board. And when I say diversify, I don't want you to just think ethnically or racially or gender identity. You need a broader skill set, individuals with different professional backgrounds, different life experiences, different areas of expertise. Very common on a nonprofit board to want to have a couple of people with strong financial background, people with legal background. Obviously, in your case, people that have strong ties to the mountaineering and the alpinist community makes sense, and you're always going to attract those people. But those broader skill sets, somebody that does a lot of work in marketing and communications, there are a number of skill areas that it's advantageous to you to have on your board, because then as you have to reckon with some of the decisions that need to be made and some of the challenges that every nonprofit faces, you can draw upon the experience of your board. And you can be informed by their own life and professional experiences. And sometimes you can get there faster because you don't have to recreate the wheel every time you need to make a decision. The other reality is your board turns over really frequently. You know, having a board chair for only a year, I've shared this with Jesse and the other members of the EC. In addition to working professionally as an executive director, I'm currently the board chair for a nonprofit here in town with a $7 million operating budget. I just took over as the board chair last May. That's a 3-year term. So I look at it as I have this year to really learn the role. Next year, you know, year 2 is kind of the year to really execute on the priorities that I have developed, working very closely alongside the executive director. And then the 3rd year is really about completing that work and onboarding the person that's going to follow me. And then on this board, once you finish your term as president, you stay on for at least a couple more years as past president, and you become an invaluable resource to the person that follows you as board chair. So I really think in the board, particularly in your elected board roles, your president, your treasurer, it would be tremendously advantageous if those positions did not rotate so frequently and you had more consistency. I suspect from talking with a lot of you that part of what has been hard is that each time you have a new executive committee or a new executive director, that person comes in or persons, and they set new priorities, and then everything that you were working on kind of goes out the window. And that has added to that sense of what are we focused on now, and what is strategic priority, as opposed to the area of interest or the place where a current leader, you know, wants to make an impression, leave a legacy with the organization. The roles and structure piece also really goes beyond just the executive committee. And it talks also about how we set up the roles for our committees. So do people understand their roles? Is there clarity about which decisions committees and committee chairs have the discretion to make, and which ones should be made in collaboration with, say, other committees, with the EC, with the staff? It seems to me that there's a lot of confusion around that one, and that if I were to try to put my finger on what I sense is causing the greatest frustration out there, it has to do with that. Changes in who's making what decisions. It used to work like this, now it doesn't. I used to be able to decide to spend this money, now I can't, or I could, and then I couldn't. All of that adds to confusion. And when all of you are generous volunteers giving your time, when those things are hard to do, you get frustrated. And when you get frustrated, you stop being as enthusiastic about volunteering. So that needs to be worked out as soon as we can, just for the benefit and the health of the organization, and for the satisfaction of all of you, the members, who give so much time to making Mazamas go. Okay, what's next? So I kind of alluded a bit to number 8, which has to do with the bylaws. You know, I've said it to the board, and I will say it to all of you. There are a number of things that we can do to help the organization run more effectively. We can do some work to get your financial situation improved. We can help clarify roles, and we can get the staff doing the right work. We can do all of those things, but you have some limitations codified in your bylaws that are going to keep you from being viable and sustainable long-term if you don't address them. So kind of the elephant in the room really is the organization's readiness and willingness to think about your bylaws and how you might change those. You know, there are a number of areas for discussion. I just gave you several talking points around the structure of the board. Obviously, the structure of who can be a member of Mazamas, whether or not you keep the glaciated peak requirement, all of those things have a tremendous amount to do with the vision that you're setting for the future and the strategy that will get developed to work in concert with that vision. So I think that's something I really want you to walk away with tonight, and we'll be giving you more to think about as we strive to make that decision together. But we need to clarify the type of organization we're going to be and what it means to be a part of it. And you're not going to be able to build that robust strategy with a new leader until you understand what direction you're taking.
Kayleen, let me chime in here. A couple different folks have asked the question that's, can you talk about the advantages, disadvantages of being primarily a 1001c or a 501c nonprofit versus being a more membership-based organization?
Sure. I'm happy to do that. The primary difference, well, there are two that I think need emphasis right away. As a 501c3, a couple of things happen. You are eligible to receive charitable donations. So individuals or companies that share their financial resources with you can write that off. Obviously, that's a huge benefit to individuals that choose to give in the nonprofit space. And so by maintaining that tax status, you give people the ability to make tax-free they make contributions that they can write off on their taxes, not tax-free, but it reduces their tax burden. The other reality is it changes how you can fundraise. So there are dozens of foundations that fund nonprofit work in our community. I'm sure several of you are aware of many of them. The Meyer Memorial Trust, the Oregon Community Foundation, the Collins Foundation. I could keep listing them. Those are some of the big ones, but there are dozens of foundations who support the work of nonprofits in our community. The trick there is this: those foundations are looking at what are the community and societal problems that are happening in the greater Portland metro area, in Oregon, or even across the West Coast or nationwide. And they're making very deliberate choices about how they allocate their grant funding based on the societal issues that they're trying to solve. So in today's climate, you hear a lot about things like, how do we better serve underrepresented communities? I don't think this comes as a surprise to anybody. The Mazamas is a very white, middle to upper middle class organization. Those are not generally the people who most need the benefit of grant support in our communities. And so a lot of those foundations are looking to nonprofits to say, if you want our support, show us how your work is impacting underserved communities, whether that's economically, whether that is from a racial standpoint, whether that's people with disabilities. So all of that is something that you have to look at. But as a 501c3, you get the opportunity to compete in that arena for those funds. And the expectation for that privilege is that you are intentionally delivering your mission to broader than just members of your organization, like a church, or a school or an athletic club. So the converse then of a 501c3 is to simply own your identity as a membership organization. So we are an organization who has a mission purpose that is tied around serving our members. So that is, with your classes, with the community that you all share with one another. And I hear it time and again that the sense of community and connectedness to people that share your passion are a huge advantage and reason that people want to be a part of the Mazamas. But if you take that route, then you have to assume that the majority of your funding is going to be member driven. So your membership dues, what it costs you to take classes, fundraising events that are largely open to members, and members are being asked to fund them. You may be able to do, so yes, Anna, you're right. Mazamas is right now currently a 501c3. So the question is, if you move too far in the membership direction, you threaten your status as a C3. So that's really what's on the table. If you're going to be an organization that is focused on serving and providing program to members, you risk losing that 501c3 designation because you cannot adequately demonstrate your community benefit. And that's one of the attributes of your organization that's essential in order to maintain that status. So I think that I just sort of cue that up as the difference. It's going to be who is a member of your organization, who you serve, and how you get funded. Will be the biggest factors that are different if you become a membership-based organization versus continue to move in the direction of being kind of a vibrant, functioning 501c3. And again, I would offer, there's not a right or wrong choice here. There's simply the choice that's going to be, that's going to meet the needs and meet the moment for this organization and move you in the direction that you want to go. Okay, so let's see. Let me peek back at the recommendations and see where we're at. So I think it's probably clear, and we can talk more about it, that whatever choice we make, we are going to need to make some changes to the bylaws to be consistent with those choices, so that you're structured in a way that lets your leadership, staff, and board carry out the tasks that they need to help you be vibrant. I think diversity, equity, and inclusion, that continues to be a big issue. I know it's polarizing. I understand that there's it's a difficult political climate out there, but regardless of where we all may stand personally, in the nonprofit sector, there is tremendous pressure on nonprofits from funders to make sure that they're walking their talk in the equity and inclusion space. It's not enough to just have a statement that lives on your website. Were you to move in the direction of wanting to pursue funding, say from foundations, you not only would need to have that statement, but I write grants a lot for other clients. You cannot write a grant today without having 3 or 4 questions that you have to answer that explains what you are doing to make your staff, your board, and those that you serve with your programming more equitable, more inclusive. And they're looking for specifics. They're looking for, these are our initiatives. This is what's changed. This is what we're pointing towards. Right now, that discussion is pretty shallow in Mazamas. I know there's a lot of interest amongst members, but in terms of actually documentable steps you've taken or plans you have in place, those largely remain to be developed. And that's something that you're going to need to focus on if you want to be competitive in the nonprofit funding space. So next is a communications piece. And I really mentioned that at the top of the meeting. I think that one is key. There's just been my sense is, and I wish I could see all of your faces right now, because my sense is that there's a perception out there that information has not been forthcoming. It's been hard to get the information that you need. Not everybody is working from the same playbook. Maybe you don't always get the same answer depending upon who you ask, or maybe maybe information is just not getting to you in a timely manner. So in order to make responsive decisions, you have to have real-time information. It seems to me that there may also be just a need to clarify what information really is appropriate to put in the hands of everybody who's a member of the organization, and what information do you elect a board and then you trust them to work with some of the more sensitive or confidential information and make well-informed, intelligent decisions on your behalf. So I think that too may need some revisiting so that we set people's expectations appropriately for what information they should expect to get, and what information they may learn about filtered through the work of the board, who they helped to put in place. And then I think the last bullet, or the last recommendation rather, just relates back to some of the issues that I get the impression have kind of happened over the last few years. So, as an organization grows and changes over time, and you have newer members and older members and younger members, it's just a reality. In any organization, you sometimes have situations where somebody maybe didn't show their best self on a particular day. But setting standards for how you're going to treat each other, and everybody's expectations of what it means to be in a Mazama's program, and how you're going to be respected, acknowledged, et cetera, that's really important. And it is up to the board, but they need the support of the membership to set the standard for how we're going to treat each other in this organization. So that one continues to be important. So those are the 11 recommendations. I tried to move through that fairly briskly. Amy, does this feel like a good point to pivot to questions, or are there anything else you want me to touch on before we kind of start to work through some of the things that have come up in the chat?
I think this is a good time to pivot to some of the questions that have been coming up.
Okay. And maybe we can pull the slide deck down just so that we can see a few more spaces on the screen. Amy, we'll let you kind of point them our way. I didn't look at the chat as close while I was talking, so I'll catch up now.
Great. All right, Kayleen. And also any of the other EC members, feel free to chime in on any of these questions. So a question from Doug Twitchell is, has the Mazamas considered two types of membership? One group of people who have summited a glaciated mountain, and the other that hasn't summited. There would be two unique names for these groups. The groups that have summited would pay lower fees, and the other group higher fees. Is that something that you want to address, Kayleen? I can also chime in on that one too.
Yeah, I'll just make a couple, I'll try to offer a couple comments from my perspective as somebody coming in from the outside, and then I'll let board members chime in more about the historical context. So the way that you frame that question, Amy, my understanding is that that's your system right now. You've got, in essence, you have members and non-members, right? Your members do pay less than your non-members, and you have to have summited a glaciated peak in order to be a member. So yes, you could say to those non-members, you can now be members. If you keep the glaciated peak requirement, you don't fully solve your problem within the context of being able to fundraise in the nonprofit space, because you still have created an exclusivity clause that's going to keep many people from being eligible. I could hear a funder saying, well, what about people with disabilities? Somebody who wants to summit Mount Hood but is not physically capable. You're denying them the opportunity to be a member based on a factor that they don't have control of. So I'll just throw this out as a possibility. One thing that I've wondered about for you is, could you disconnect the glaciated peak status from what it means to be a member? So let me explain that. Membership is membership. It costs what it costs, but you have an honor level, if you will, a status level disconnected to how much somebody pays. That is for those people that have summited a glaciated peak. And because most people that come to you, they take BSEPs, they are interested in becoming alpinists, and many of them have aspirations to summit. It would make sense to me that a lot of those people coming in will eventually become, they would earn that status and emphasizing those of you that have done that continues to make it seem prestigious to do so. So there might be a way to disconnect the glaciated peak status from the way that you raise money. And maybe that's a way to kind of have your cake and eat it too. So, but I'll throw it open to any board members that want to chime in on that.
I know I was working on the bylaws team, and that was a question that did come up as a possibility to put that out to the membership, to have the two different types of membership. And there was a survey a few years prior before that went out asking that question, and it got an overwhelming no from the members that did answer that survey, that they felt that wasn't a good alternative, and that it created a class system. Kind of just, I think Kayleen kind of talked about that. And so that was something that the bylaws team and the EC, we kind of went a different direction because of that feedback we'd received from the membership.
Yeah, I do see creating having, particularly when your membership has different levels and you get to pay less if you've summited a peak. I mean, that is not going to play well in kind of the funding side of the world, or even in the DEI space. You're going to run into a lot of critique. So which is that's kind of what led me to wonder about continuing to celebrate that achievement in a very meaningful way, but disconnecting it from your fundraising mechanisms.
All right. Any other thoughts from other EC folks on that one? All right. Another question here. Has there been a survey done or research as to why membership has declined in recent years? Yeah.
Amy, I don't think I've seen a survey that's unique to Mazama's. I could speak a little bit about volunteerism holistically in the nonprofit, just in our communities.
Yeah, I'm not positive that has been a discussion as far as having a survey for past members that haven't reinstated their membership, but that hasn't been something we've been able to successfully capture the data on. So if you could speak to what's been happening within other organizations, that'd be great.
Yeah, you bet. I'm happy to. So I think I already mentioned the national trend has been a decline in membership. So it is not, what Mazama's is facing is not unique to you. You are caught up in a trend that is happening across the country. I think there's a few things that are contributing to that. Millennials are not so much joiners as baby boomers and Gen Xers were. So we're simply seeing people are making very intentional decisions about how to spend their valuable time. And there's just a trend. If you look at Kiwanis clubs and Rotaries and Elks clubs, all the animal clubs, as I call them, they're all seeing tremendous decline in their membership. People 40 and under are not joining things at anywhere near the rate that people, 50, 60 plus were when they were in that stage of their life. So most of the analysis and research that's happening out there is seeking to understand then, how are those individuals getting their community needs met? How are they engaging with organizations? Because we're not seeing, so for example, we're seeing volunteerism go down, but we're not seeing a corresponding drop in the younger generation supporting nonprofits financially. That continues to be robust. So what it suggests is people are looking for opportunities to do the things that they care about in more condensed packages. So maybe I don't want to join your organization and maintain membership year after year, but when I want to take BSEP or ICS, I'll come and pay the money, and I'm happy to engage in that. But I'm looking for more of a time-bound, limited duration opportunity to use my recreational time or my available volunteer time. So I think, as you think about your classes, your activities, how you structure those, what they cost, it may be that you need to emphasize that more and look at the pricing structure connected to that, and de-emphasize reliance on membership. So those are some of the things that national trends would suggest should be part of an analysis as you look at how to repackage what you're offering, what it costs, and how people spend money to be connected to Mazamas.
One thing I think I would add in terms of just kind of when we think about opportunity and membership is that we're not the only game in town anymore. There are a number of opportunities to find outdoor education that identify either with a specific group or schooling. And so in that context as well, I think we need to make a compelling case to the community as to why would folks want to be a Mazama member versus some of the other opportunities that are out there.
On the question of have we collected data on like why people haven't renewed their membership, the answer is no, because honestly, like we haven't had the capacity to do that. I mean, it takes a lot of work just to like for the day-to-day monthly things that need to happen to keep programs running and like the doors open at the MMC and that kind of thing. So like having people that would be willing to find out that information, to contact people, call them up or email them, whatever, would be helpful. But there is like anecdotal things like sometimes people will leave comments or just keep in touch with them. One reason that I've heard anecdotally is that the Mazamas isn't doing enough on DEI efforts. We've talked about it a lot, but we haven't made like meaningful change. So that's one thing.
Thanks, everybody. Question that has come in from a few different folks is, Kayleen, in your opinion, what is the potential, money out there for grants if we do change our membership requirement?
That's a great question, a really great question. So I actually spent some time over the weekend, and I shared this with the EC, and I will recap it for all of you right now. Spent some time over the weekend looking at all of the major funders. So when I say funders, I mean foundation funders. So the foundations that provide grant funding to nonprofits here locally. And what I was wanting to accomplish was to understand a couple of things. How might the eligibility requirements of these foundations affect Mazamas and your ability to even be considered for a grant? And assuming that you are in fact eligible to apply, how might your particular mission and the programming that you guys are dedicated to, how would that play, if you will, on a board of trustees for one of the foundations in light of the priorities that they have identified for our community? So I see a couple of areas where you're going to need to really lean in if you want to be competitive in the grant space. So the first is going to be to pass the litmus test, if you will, that you are not just an exclusive membership organization and that the impact of your work benefits more than just those of you who have paid your membership dues to be able to call yourself a member of the Mazamas. So I'll use the Murdoch Charitable Trust as an example. Right in their FAQs for eligibility, it says, if your nonprofit exists to solely serve the needs of your members, or if this grant you're asking for is going to provide benefit only to people that are members of your organization, you're not eligible to apply. So that one was really cut and dry, but that you're going to run into that. And my sense is if you were to submit a grant and you're being reviewed, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get put in the no pile over the assessment that you're not equitable and inclusive enough. So let's assume that that's fixed. Let's assume that we took care of that and we meet the eligibility requirements, and now we are ready to apply in grant space. What is it going to take to get grant funding? The areas I think that you could have the most success right out of the gate, you have some serious capital needs up at the lodge. we absolutely could write some grants that I think would help you with some of your capital work. So at the lodge, also potentially at the MMC, I think we would need to be able to articulate convincingly that the result of those capital projects are going to benefit, more than just members. So that's something we'll have to think about. So maybe you're remodeling the lodge, A, because it desperately needs it, some of the structural issues, but B, because you're looking at how you can open the lodge up and make it more available for the community to use or to rent. That would probably play in grant space. On the programmatic side, that's where I think now we're right back to that kind of fundamental decision about who you are. Right now, where you see the most focus in foundation funding priorities, climate is huge, education is huge, supporting the needs of underserved communities, whether that be economically underserved, the disability community. I mean, any community with a protected status, you're going to find grant funders that are extremely focused on trying to raise the outcomes for those marginalized communities. So I could see through the work, like Mazama Wild is a great example, right? If you're talking about fostering, and I've written a number, I used to write grants for the Mount St. Helens Institute, and they do a tremendous amount of education for kids in the summer. They do summer programming. They're teaching kids about volcanoes. They're bringing them out to Mount St. Helens, and they can talk about how these kids' educational outcomes are improving. They can talk about how their appreciation for nature and desire to protect the environment improves as a result of their programs. Were you to move in that direction, I think you would be competitive programmatically. But I think that's what you're going to need to think about. Because right now, the membership within committees is more focused on the recreational activities that you all enjoy so much. And it's been more the staff that has been focused on the program side that might meet the grant criteria. So that's why I say that's hard to sustain all of that when they're not integrated. And that's what I think you need to consider. So I think you can get grants. I do not think you're going to fund this whole organization on grants. I think there are other nonprofits that will have a higher percentage success rate in the grant arena than Mazama's will, but I think there's money there, assuming that it fits for you. What I would not encourage you to do is what I would call the tail wagging the dog. Do not remake your organization just so you can compete in the grant field. Make sure that you're building the organization that you all believe is the right one, and then put together a funding plan that will support that vision.
Great. Thanks, Kayleen. Another question coming in from Dave Acton is there someone on the EC doing a detailed analysis on which of the bylaws are the biggest hindrances? Can that be summarized and sent or presented to the membership at some point? What is the best path forward to getting out the outdated bylaws changed? And there were some other conversations going on about the bylaws being, with needing to change anything within the bylaws, needing 2/3 a vote to change it. And one of the suggestions from Rico was saying that that perhaps is one of the bylaws that needs to be changed, is that since that pretty much means minority rule is kind of running the organization. So I was wondering if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Is anybody else on? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll chime in. I think there's an element of sequencing that we need to contemplate. And what I mean by that is that, as we consider some of these weighty decisions of who we wish to be, that then may drive, how we wish, what bylaws we may need to impact or influence or change. But I think there may be some of these initial existential questions that we first need to align on before we can kind of execute on whatever that plan may be. Now, with that said, there may be some initial, just kind of like foundational things that we identify. And, I think when I take a step back from sequencing, I think what we're hoping to do here is just bring awareness and make you all kind of aware of kind of the criticality of where we're at. And then with that, I'm hoping that we kind of galvanize and create some energy around kind of the understanding of what particular bylaws we may need to change. So I think, to maybe say this more succinctly, there's probably two opportunities. One is, what are those immediate quick hits we can do? And then two, once we identify who we're at, then there'll probably be some additional items that we need to contemplate.
Yeah, I think that's well said, David. For example, I would submit to you that you need to change your structure around how you nominate people to the board and how the board operates in terms of terms, regardless of what decision you make for future vision and path. So that would be an example of something that I would encourage you. The sooner you address that, the more flexibility you give to your organization to be nimble. And right now, because you're in a tight financial situation, you need all the nimbleness and flexibility that you can possibly give the organization. And then as you begin to have more clarity about what your long-term strategic vision is for the organization, there probably is a second round of bylaw changes that may be needed, to bring yourself in alignment with that. So it may be that you can do it all at once, but I don't think there's anything wrong with approaching it, taking a phased approach to getting those changes made.
I see that, Alex, has your hand raised. You feel free to take yourself off mute and ask a question or comment. That may have been an unintentional hand raise.
I think.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, when we were talking about outreach to membership earlier, one of the things for me, I've been a member of Mazama since 2011. I took BSEP back then, and I guess so now starting to feel like a bit of the old guard, if you will. But anecdotally, for me, I'm one of 12 students in BSEP back then. I am the only one that continued beyond that year. As far as I know, no other students in that cohort of 12 climbed anything after BSEP was over. And I've often wondered, where did everybody go and why? Did they not get what they wanted out of BSEP, and why have they disappeared? Because I, like I'm sure everybody else on this call, get tremendous amount of value out of this organization. I mean, I'm just looking at the people that are on my screen right now. I've climbed with 9 people on this screen. So I don't get why all these people have disappeared. So for me, it's like, that's been one of my kind of recurring questions is, what has Mazama's done to find out why these people disappear after 2 months?
I think there's a real opportunity there. And I think there's sorry, Kim, I'll chime in.
No, go ahead. You're good. Go right ahead.
I think there's a real opportunity there to just understand exactly that. And I think that's a theme of questions as well. I think in the current board context, we've been, when we think about just sort of triaging, we've been just trying to really kind of keep the lights on through some of these executive and staff transitions. But I think those are the questions when we're able to kind of douse some of these fires for the moment, is to really ask those questions around, why are people leaving? What are going to be the things that are going to be compelling for people to come back to us and or create new energy with new membership? And the way to do that is going directly to the source, right? For these various audiences.
All right, I'm going to shift gears here a little bit. A few questions have been coming in about the lodge and there being some opportunity there for that to be a better revenue source for the organization. Is that something you'd like to chime in about, Kayleen, or anybody else?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And just for those of you on the call that don't know this might be a helpful piece of context. For almost 10 years, from 2009 to 2018, I was the executive director just a couple miles down the mountain at the Mount Hood Kiwanis camp. So we were it's a 22-acre property on the Little Zigzag River. I think maybe even one of the early Mazama's lodges was down near that. I think Charles told me that when I first started. So I share that only because I want you to know I have a lot of context for operating facilities in the snow zone on Mount Hood. We had 3 major lodges and a dozen small buildings in addition to a huge maintenance facility. And so the realities of running a space on the mountain are many, and this was a summer camp. It still is. So they were in full swing in the summer when kids and adults with disabilities were there, but they embarked on quite a project, or we did during my tenure, to improve the quality of the buildings, take care of all kinds of deferred maintenance. I think we probably spent $250,000 on septic work, in the first 5 or 6 years I was on board. So the goal, though, was to do a more adequate job of renting the camp out to the public when we weren't running our own programming. So we identified the same opportunity that I think the Mazamas has to turn our property and our buildings into a source of revenue, and to keep them busy year round with guests, because anybody who's ever been responsible for a camp property knows when somebody says, well, why don't you just lock the gate and walk away? It can't work like that. So there are a tremendous number of costs and expenses that you're going to pay, whether the doors are locked or whether the buildings are full. And so the question is, how do you leverage that? So I think, a couple of observations back on the topic of clarity. I think there is more conversation to be had about the balance between our Mazama's classes happening at the lodge, and then when the lodge is available for members or affiliates, and or is it available to the general public? I think that should be considered. And there's nothing wrong with prioritizing your classes to use a lodge. I think that's fine. You just have to understand then what that means. Be consistent in how you price. And then think about, if you are going to rent the lodge when you're not operating classes there, how to set up the cost structure. I mean, I will be honest. I think it's right around maybe $30 a night to stay at the lodge as a member. It's not enough. You can't stay anywhere on the mountain for that low of a price. So from set aside for a minute, I understand it's a member benefit. That makes a ton. I understand all of the backstory on that, but from a financial sustainability, from a revenue source standpoint, you're inadequately charging for the lodge. This was exactly the problem that Kiwanis Camp had when I got there. And we had a lot of upset Kiwanians when we raised the price, because they had been going for years, really inexpensively, and they were not happy with me for suggesting that the cost should go up. But I say this to you all in total sincerity. If the lodge can be a moneymaker for you, but you have to make it a moneymaker. That doesn't mean it has to cost $100 a night, but it just means it's something that you need to reevaluate and make some choices about. Because the other thing that I think perhaps not enough people realize is you have some pretty significant deferred maintenance up there. There's a roof and chimney issue that is probably 6 figures at least to resolve, and that's just one of a handful of issues that I took a tour of a few weeks ago. So beginning to figure out how to make the lodge more more functional by taking care of some of that deferred maintenance so that it stays a strong facility for years to come, and then deciding how to use it is key. And I just saw a question, who ultimately makes decisions about the lodge. Now we're right back to the clarity question. I think a lot of that has been given to the lodge committee, and I would suggest to you that that's not fair to the lodge committee. The executive director and the EC hold the purse strings. And when we're making decisions about $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 investments, when we have a budget that's $190,000 in a deficit, it's got to be your executive director and your executive committee that are deciding when and how to make those investments. So I think there's a critically important role for the lodge committee. I don't want to be misunderstood that I am undervaluing that group. There are a number of ways that those committed individuals provide huge service. But I would submit to you that there needs to be better coordination, and there needs to be some clarity about what are the decisions that we're leaving to the lodge committee to make recommendations to the staff and board on, and then what are the decisions that ultimately the board will consider those recommendations and make. And my sense right now is that's pretty gray, and that makes it harder for everybody to help the lodge be successful. Oh, Amy, you're muted.
All right. There's a question here from Suresh asking, is there a short-term plan for raising money as opposed to broader changes that are being discussed?
That one's a really good question. I think that right now we've been focused on just understanding what our financial situation is and looking for where we have the ability to make sort of quick course corrections that might help us to stabilize the budget. The EC met in retreat about 2 weeks ago, and it didn't take very much analysis to realize that in order to get ourselves to budget neutral within this fiscal year, we would have to make cuts so deep in the organization that it would be like cutting off our nose to spite our face. So we recognize we probably need to set a path to be budget neutral, like by the end of the next fiscal year, by the end of the 2023 fiscal year. But in the interim space, be looking for two things. Where do we have the ability to do some cutting back in our spending? And that'll touch all of us, right? All of you that are out there on committees or running committees have committee budgets that were approved. And yet we may need to ask everybody to think about how they can reduce 5, 10, 15% from their budget. Now I'm out over my skis here. The EC has not had that discussion yet. That's not pending, but I'm just being really honest with you that if we're going to help overcome our deficit, then it's going to take all of us collectively making some decisions about where we might be able to save. Now, the question was, what ideas do we have to bring in revenue in the short term? So I think that this could be a really good time to approach the membership with a special appeal. I have had to do that in the past. I had to do that one in my early tenure at the Kiwanis camp because they were in a situation not dissimilar to where you guys are right now. And we went out to the membership and said, hey, here's our plan. We're not just asking you to refill our coffers with no plan for how we're going to use that money well or sustain your gifts. But here is the plan we've put in place. Here are the steps that we're taking. Here is why we think we're going to be able to raise more money from other sources down the road. And here's the need we're bringing to you right now. So I'm incredibly curious and invite any of you that have thoughts on that. You are all members and supporters of Mazama's. Would that argument fly with you right now? If you felt comfortable that we had a plan that made sense and you saw that we were executing on it, would you be able and willing to step up with some short-term funding? You know, I think that's something that you may need to rely on yourselves to help in the short term. And then long term, you need to know that there's a plan that goes beyond just all of your individual generosity that's going to help the organization stay vibrant.
David, did you have any thoughts on that as far as, what we're currently doing in the short term, not even necessarily in regard to raising money, but also maybe cutting back?
I think my immediate response would be that I think, I think it's going to take invested folks like the people on this line to identify or come up with ideas. I think as a board, we put forth a number of ideas and are going to prioritize those. I mentioned before, I think one of the first steps that coming out of the board retreat was just socializing kind of the level of need and trying to gain some alignment. We have our perspectives around what we think could address some of the top line issues, whether that's increased membership costs, increased activity costs, look at other opportunities. That's kind of the top line. From a bottom line, as Kayleen had said, we're not going to be able to cut our way out of this. I mean, materially, we're running a 20%, and that's on the conservative side, deficit budget. And when we have a budget of $1 million per year, give or take, that's a material amount that we need to make up in some fashion. So roundabout way that it is going to take both kind of top line and bottom line considerations. And I think would love to understand from a lot of the vested folks on the line here. We're not going to be able to go through all the considerations on the call in the next 10, 20 minutes, but I think hoping to start the conversation here and that sending this information on to the board, sending it on to Kayleen, and determining kind of what rises to the surface, I think will put us in better shape.
Awesome, thank you. And Dave and Stephanie, you have your hand up. You can unmute yourselves and ask your question.
You guys asked if we would be willing to just donate money. And I would if you had like buckets. So you said like, you know, donate to like this specific fund. I feel like some of my concern in the past is that there hasn't been a lot of transparency with like where the money is going. Like I know that we're in dire straits, but like what are we spending money on? What do we need money for? And so if we had like buckets and say like donate to like this fund, like education or the lodge or whatever, like maybe 3 buckets, I would love to donate if like I had like an area that I knew where the money was going.
That's helpful to understand. You know, I think one of the things that we talked about in the board retreat was that, you know, and Kayleen had mentioned it earlier, there is some real deferred maintenance on the lodge and when from a capital expense perspective that we'll need to address. And, you know, again, using the language of Kayleen, maybe over my skis on this, but, you know, that's to the tune of probably 6+ figures. And that hasn't been contemplated within the existing budget. And so when we kind of think about a capital fundraising campaign, that to me is one of the things that rises to the top. There may be another 1 or 2 items, but at least, you know, a lot of us have memories built around that. You know where those specific funds would go. And so I think that's a good idea, or I should say maybe just good feedback in terms of how we might want to approach this.
And you know, I would also throw out, and this one is, you know, having served in the ED role for a lot of my career, and I was a development director before I was an executive director. Here's the reality, everyone. It's not nearly as fun to pay for the light bill and the insurance and staff salaries, and those things are not as exciting to fund. And yet without those things, a nonprofit can't function. And so there's always a balance. Stephanie, I hear you loud and clear, and have done really effective fundraising when you're in a position that you need to fund something specific. So I would say right now in Mazama's case, the most obvious thing would be some of that deferred maintenance at the lodge. But I also just want to submit, I mean, the activities that Mazamas are engaged in come with a fair amount of risk. Your insurance reflects that. And that's just a reality. And so you know, there's always think it's important for a nonprofit to try to function in a transparent way so that you as potential donors have enough confidence in the organization that if you write $100 check, you don't always feel that you have to direct where every penny of that $100 is going to go, because you have faith in the organization to use your money with wisdom. And I think some of that is missing right now. I mean, that's a little bit of what I hear is there's some fair questions and concerns. I'm not sure that I'm confident about where the dollars I donate are going. And that's feedback that the EC and the staff really need, because we need to earn your trust so that you will fund both the specific projects and feel good about writing a check to just generally support the organization because you trust in how it spends.
That's great. There's a question coming in, just asking, saying that there's a lot of information that we've been presented tonight, and wondering if we're going to have a future town hall where once people can have a chance to digest all this information.
Yeah, excellent question. And the short answer is yes. As far as specifics, so the EC meets tomorrow, everyone. So I have no doubt that tonight's conversation and the board retreat that we had 2 weeks ago will be the majority of our conversation tomorrow. And we'll very much be focused on how do we use what you've shared with us? The session's being recorded. We're copying all of the comments in the chat, and we will go through them all as we have time. And we anticipate, as I said at the outset, this is the start of a conversation. It's not the end of the conversation. So give us your feedback. We need it and we want it. If this format was good, I definitely think that we will be happy to do this again. Maybe maybe a couple more times around just getting the information out. And then perhaps, I'm just making this up as I go here, you guys, but perhaps there are some sessions that are on particular topics, right? And we say, okay, tonight we're going to have a conversation about the lodge. Anybody that wants to, log on, join us. We'll continue to use the bulletin. Gina Bonole is our newest staff member who is working on communications and kind of office admin for us. She is a social media guru. If you have not noticed it yet, you are going to see in the very near future a lot more activity on Mazama social media channels. So she'll be pushing information out there, and that's another good place to share back. So we'll figure out the path, and we're open to your ideas about what would help you. But I think I can confidently speak on behalf of the board when I say we want to make these decisions with your input, transparently to you, and in hopes that as these decisions get made, you are aligned with the path that we set, and feeling really good about it. And that only happens if we take responsibility for making sure that we engage you in the conversation and that we give you good information, so that you can help share with us your thinking.
Great. And we have had both Walter and Barbara from the nominating committee chime in as far as folks that are potentially interested in joining, running for the nominating committee or the executive council. The organization, we've been talking about it throughout the last hour and a half. We're always looking for individuals that have expertise that could help, with being on the executive council. So if you know someone, or if you think that you might be a good fit, please volunteer to help, to be a part of one of those, potentially one of those committees.
Yeah, I could imagine in the short term, again, these are some things that we'll need to talk about, but there are a handful of areas, and we've touched on most of them tonight, that need some intense short-term attention. And so it could be that we create a handful of ad hoc, I'm not even going to call them committees because that has a different meaning in Mazama's. Let's call them task forces or work groups. Some people that work short-term, maybe a 3 to 6 month time horizon, on helping us with some of the things that we've identified tonight. So there are a number of ways to share your time, your talent, and your treasure. What we hope is that you'll find the one that works for you, and you'll be as generous with all of those as you can be.
Yeah, I think there was a notice of, I don't know, back in like November or December about forming, we tried to form some work groups, but didn't get very many takers back then. So definitely will, now that people are more aware of the need, maybe you want to help out.
Yeah, and maybe just to talk through some of those, I think people are responding in chat, but I think one area is expertise in fundraising and communications and marketing. I chair the finance committee, and I think just even literally in the last few weeks, we've had some additional folks reach out, and I think we're starting to build a kind of a good bench for that committee with subject matter expertise. And for some of you, I think you even just reached out in the last couple of days and hope to reach out to yet. I think there's the expression, many hands do light work, and I think we're at a point where we need many hands in kind of multiple ways. But I think in regards to the EC, those specific areas would be very helpful. Additionally, I think we do have some legal expertise on the board. But I think that's another area that, as we contemplate bylaws, just that perspective, and or if you work in kind of a regulatory capacity within your kind of given area, I think that's the type of expertise that would be helpful as well.
Yeah. The other thing I want to throw out there, just because almost all of you on the call tonight are volunteers, I also think that there's an opportunity in all of this work that we're talking about tonight, but even in general, you would benefit, I think, from having more staff volunteer cross-pollination in some of your committees and work. So particularly as we think about the work related to stabilizing the organization, I would hope every one of those work groups would have a staff person as well as volunteers on it, to sort of help you all learn how to carry the water together, right? As opposed to like the staff is over here doing their thing and committees are over here. I know that that's not universally true. There's plenty of crossover, but I just want to really encourage that. I think that could also help everybody to understand each other's roles, and how to contribute most effectively to helping the organization be strong.
Excellent. I do think we've kind of covered the main questions that have come through. There's a few that are kind of that I can address, I think at a later time. But as far as the major themes, it seems like we've kind of tackled those.
Yeah, an hour and 40 minutes is a long time, you guys. So thank you for, I mean, the chat is testament to the robust participation. I'll say to you all now what I'll say to the EC tomorrow night. This was really strong participation. You know, this was great, and without a tremendous amount of advance notice. So thank you for making the commitment. We will commit to continuing to share and bringing you as much information as we can. I know that we are all available, you know, we'll make ourselves available, and really want to help you all chart a path forward. So let's continue to work together. Expect to hear more from us, and put your thinking caps on, because we need everybody's creative energy. And yeah, whatever combination of time, talent, and treasure that you're ready to share, we would sure appreciate it.
Yes.
And okay, one more thing. I would be remiss not to tell you all that you have a tremendous board. This is really, you've got a great group of people serving on this board. They care and they're working hard. And I want you to know that I think you're well led. And I really have appreciated the chance to work with them. And I hope that they will continue to stay engaged, and that many of you will also become engaged. All right, Jesse, it's yours.
I just want to say thank you everybody for coming and participating, and really appreciate your input. And I hope we can continue our dialogue. And it's really important to me that more people understand how the Mazama works, like the business side of things, and how that's important to that sense of community, that, you know, the reason we're all here. So thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone.